Welcome back to Atomic News, monitoring global chaos so you don't have to. On Wednesday, March 11, 2026, a G7 leaders video conference took place, focused on the war around Iran, the threat to the Strait of Hormuz, and the spike in global oil prices. But the discussion almost immediately moved to another issue: whether Russia might end up gaining additional profits amid a new energy crisis. After the meeting, both Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz made it clear that the majority of participants opposed any easing of sanctions. Merz put it even more directly, saying that 6 out of the 7 G7 countries had clearly spoken against such a move.
As you all know, we had a video conference with the G7 leaders on Wednesday, and 6 out of 7 were clearly the opinion that we should not release the sanctions against Russia. We were a little bit surprised that we heard this morning that the American government decided differently.
The United States appear to have chosen otherwise. The problem is that on March 13th, the United States went ahead with a temporary easing of oil sanctions against Russia. The U.S. Treasury allowed the purchase of Russian oil and petroleum products already at sea, provided they had been loaded before March 12th. And that waiver will remain in effect until April 11th. Washington's formal explanation was simple: an attempt to cool the market slightly amid the war with Iran and supply disruptions through Hormuz.
That the only thing prohibiting transit in the Straits right now is Iran shooting at shipping. It is open for transit should Iran not do that. Now, there's a reason why we chose as one of our primary objectives to destroy the Navy.
That is exactly what triggered a sharp reaction from Kyiv. On March 13th in Paris, Volodymyr Zelensky said that even such a short-term easing could bring Moscow around $10 billion, money that would go not into the economy or social spending, but directly into continuing the war against Ukraine. And he added a line that essentially sums up the whole situation in one sentence: lifting sanctions so that more drones can later fly at you is, in my opinion, not the right decision. Against this backdrop, another revealing statement came from Donald Trump. During the conversation with G7 leaders, he said that Iran was supposedly about to surrender. And later that same March 13th, in an interview on Fox News Radio, Trump separately acknowledged that, in his view, Russia may be helping Iran, at least as he put it, a little bit. So the picture turned out to be rather bizarre. Washington partially eases restrictions on Russian oil, while at the same time acknowledging that Moscow may be assisting Tehran. At the same time, Trump made another remark, this one directly related to Ukraine. He said that the United States does not need Ukraine's help in defending against drones, because according to him, Americans already know more about drones than anyone else. That statement came at a moment when Ukraine's experience in countering mass Shahed attacks has long since ceased to be theory and has become daily battlefield practice. Zelensky responded calmly, saying that rhetoric is rhetoric, and the main thing is to understand what is actually being done in practice. And almost immediately after those words, Russia reminded everyone why talk of drone warfare is no longer abstract. On the night of March 14th, Russia launched a massive combined strike against Ukraine. The main target was the Kyiv region, and Ukrainian air defense shot down 58 missiles and 402 drones. Against this backdrop, Zelensky's words about the link between Russia's war and the broader Middle East crisis no longer sounded like mere diplomatic phrasing. He has said directly that the same drones and the same methods Ukraine is facing are being used by Iran and its allies, not only against Ukraine, but also against countries in the Middle East, and against sites where Americans and Europeans are present. And in that same reality, on March 13th, sirens sounded at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, a key NATO facility hosting American forces. The day ended with a diplomatic but very telling episode. In Paris, Volodymyr Zelensky met with Iran's exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. According to the office of the president, Zelensky said that Ukraine supports the Iranian people in their struggle for freedom. condemns attacks launched from Iran against countries in the Middle East and wants to see a free and democratic Iran that does not cooperate with Russia. Pahlavi, for his part, condemned the Iranian regime's cooperation with Russia and reaffirmed his support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is what a world sinking ever deeper into global chaos looks like today. Putin first cracked open the door from a stable world order into this new era of instability back in 2014. In 2022, he kicked that door off its hinges, and since 2025, Trump has been taking a sledgehammer to the very walls that order stood on. As a result, what only recently looked like separate crises is now merging into one large disorder, where Russia's war, Iranian escalation, energy blackmail, and drone terror have become parts of the same process. Russia is no longer just censoring the internet. It is building something much closer to a digital gulag. What used to be selective blocking of websites and platforms is turning into a much broader system of control over communication, access, and even the basic ability of citizens to stay online. In March, Moscow already tested large-scale mobile internet shutdowns that disrupted banks, taxi apps, government services, and everyday business activity. Officially, the public was told this was necessary to stop Ukrainian drones from navigating. But that explanation is getting harder and harder to sell. Ukrainian drones keep getting through anyway. And the March 10th strike on Bryansk made that painfully clear. Based on footage released by Ukraine, this was not just a successful hit, but a case of real-time battle damage assessment and strike correction more than 100 kilometers inside Russian territory. So while Russians are told that internet blackouts are needed to blind Ukrainian UAVs, what is really happening looks much more like the blinding of Russia's own population. What the Kremlin is testing here is not simply air defense support, but a model of controlled internet, where digital life in whole districts or sectors can be switched off whenever the state decides it should be. At the same time, the Kremlin keeps tightening its grip on the country's major digital platforms. Meta, meaning Facebook and Instagram, has been blocked since 2022 and officially labeled extremist. YouTube, after years of throttling, is being squeezed harder as one of the last major platforms for information the state does not fully control. Discord was blocked in the fall of 2024. And Telegram, which the Kremlin once failed to crush, is once again under pressure through fines, restrictions, and direct pressure not just on the platform, but on its founder, Pavel Durov. At the same time, the state is pushing its own messenger Max as the clean, safe, surveillance-friendly replacement. And this is where the hypocrisy gets especially rich. The very people building this digital prison depend on Telegram themselves, because by now the Russian state machine can barely function without it. Even State Duma Speaker Vyacheslav Volodyn, one of the most senior officials in the country, regularly publishes major public statements there on what the regime would otherwise describe as a hostile platform, while ordinary Russians are lectured about foreign influence and the need for so-called digital sovereignty. Parts of that same ruling class still use Instagram too, even though it has been formally banned and branded dangerous for everyone else. So the message is simple. Western platforms are supposedly toxic for the public, but perfectly convenient for the elite. As usual, there is one rule for the state and another for everyone beneath it. What makes this even darker is the legal architecture now being built around it. In February, Putin signed a law allowing the security services to order telecom providers to cut off a person's mobile connection and internet access. In other words, the Kremlin is creating a system where an inconvenient citizen can be not only arrested, but digitally erased from daily life. Combine that with VPN blocking, pressure on messaging apps, centralized traffic control, and older surveillance tools like facial recognition, and this is no longer just censorship in the traditional authoritarian sense. It is the architecture of digital submission. In short, Russia is not building digital sovereignty. It is building an electronic penal zone where the state wants to know what you read, how you communicate, how you bypass restrictions, and whether you should even be allowed to remain online. And the most cynical part is that the architects of this digital gulag still happily use Telegram and even banned Instagram themselves while wrapping the rest of the country in tighter and tighter coils of electrified wire. This is Professor Nuke, and this was Atomic News. Stay alert.
So stay tuned for all the wondrous views. You're watching Atomic News.